Welcome to Elevating Your Life, where each episode is dedicated to uncovering valuable information, useful techniques, and empowering inspiration so that you can experience personal and physical abundance. Success and happiness are within your reach. I am your go-to gal who will help you find your happiness triggers and a true elevated life. If you would like to see this show in video form, check out patreon.com/wellness inspired. Thank you. I am your host, Paula Vail. Hello and welcome. So happy to have you joining us today, and I am so thrilled to share with you an amazing woman who is sharing so much about other amazing women with the world. We have with us today Jan Eliasberg. She is an award-winning writer-director devoted to telling the stories of exceptional women who were robbed of their rightful place in history. Jan is a graduate of Wesleyan University, the Yale School of Drama, and the Warren Wilson MFA program. Her book, Hannah's War, is what we will be discussing today and much more. First off, welcome, Jan. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's lovely to see you.
I'm just thrilled to have you on the show. I was thrilled to read your book. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we begin about your book, share a bit of your background with everyone. Tell us a bit about you, Jan.
Well, I've had kind of an interesting background. I call myself a glass ceiling shatterer. I went to Yale School of Drama as the only woman in a class of, well, it was in the whole school, the only woman, and graduated and then started to direct in the theater. And I did a number of productions. I worked in regional theater, and at a certain point, I felt like I just was not feeling challenged. And for me, as a creative person, the challenge is everything. If I'm not feeling a little bit scared of like what's ahead, I'm not happy. So I applied to a program that the American Film Institute has called the Directing Workshop for Women. And at that time, there were literally no women directing in film or television at all. And this program was really set up to give women an opportunity to try to break in. And I was accepted. And I made a short film in the program, and it won a bunch of awards. And I was off directing. And this is really where I was the first. I was the first woman to direct Miami Vice with Michael Mann and Wise Guy and Crime Story and all of these extremely male shows. But what was really interesting to me about those shows was that they were stories, obviously commercial and exciting and fun to make, but they were actually stories about a lot of issues that were in the world politically, particularly Miami Vice, which I think people don't remember, but I directed one episode that was about AIDS in the Catholic Church. And that was in 1987, 88, when nobody was talking about homosexuality or AIDS. It was completely verboten. And so it was very much on the cutting edge of these very exciting and important stories. And as I continued to direct television, the stories it became less important, and I began to feel like I really wanted to write my own stories. And so I went back to school. I got an MFA in fiction. And then when I went back to Hollywood, I continued to direct all during that time, because that's how I was supporting myself. And it's a wonderful job, really fun. I ended up coming up with ideas. And I went out to studios and I discovered that my ideas sold. I mean, the very first idea I came up with, it was back in the days when there were all kinds of articles about ebonics. If you remember, do we accept the language of people of color, or should they speak our language properly? And I came up with a story about a young woman who's a rap artist and a singer, and I kind of thought, oh my God, it's Pygmalion, but with racial issues and ebonics, and so I sold that, and I just kept selling these stories, always with women in the center. And the last screenplay I sold was about the women air service pilots in World War II, who are a remarkable story that I have to say, Hollywood they paid me to write it. I had Cameron Diaz, I had Nicole Kidman attached to star in it. Oh. And they would not give us the money to make the film. And this is a story that just has to be on screen. However, that was the moment when I thought, I think maybe I need to find another vehicle, because when you write these screenplays and they don't get made, it's a screenplay is an incomplete form. Nobody really wants to pick up a screenplay and read it and say, oh, what a great read. I'm going to turn off my light now. So I guess what happened then was that I was researching a project. Actually, it was for the Women Air Service Pilots project. I was in the public library, and I was reading about the day that we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And I'll just point out, because I think it's timely, that August 6th of this year is the 75th anniversary of the day that we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And there was, in the issue, huge headlines. X number of people killed, Truman vows reign of ruin. And there was an article, historical article, that because the entire project had been done in secret. And so nobody really knew anything about how this weapon had come to be. Mm-hmm. And a paragraph just stood out, this one sentence. It said, the key component that allowed the Allies to develop the bomb was brought to us by a female non-Aryan physicist. No name. And I thought, who is this woman? And why isn't her face staring out of every science textbook that we have? Mm-hmm. This was the most important discovery of the 20th century, for good and evil. And at that moment, I literally vowed that I was going to find out who she was, and I was going to tell her story, because I knew that she had an incredible story that needed to be told. So the woman was this lovely woman here. Her name was Dr. Lisa Meitner, Meitner, and she lived as a Jew. That's what non-Aryan, the New York Times did not actually say Jewish, but that's what non-Aryan meant. She was living as an Austrian Jew in Berlin. And this is in the 30s. she was working at the highest levels of research, of scientific research in the world. And she was partnered with a man named Otto Hahn, who people may know because he ended up winning the Nobel Prize, and that's another story, because she should have won the Nobel Prize with him. But as I say, that's another story. Anyway, she ended up, the two of them were collaborators, and they had been for a very, very long time. And they were on the verge of splitting the atom. And that is, of course, when you split the atom, the energy released is the energy that powers nuclear power, and of course also the atomic bomb. And as they were working toward that, I mean, they didn't know that's what they were working toward, but they were. Hitler was rising to power, and everyone, all of Lisa Meitner's colleagues said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine. You're working in such an important institute, and we'll protect you." And Austria was annexed, and the next day, one of her colleagues turned her in, and she had 6 hours to leave the country, literally before she was taken to the camps. She fled to Sweden, and here's where it gets really, really interesting. Otto Hahn could not do his work without her. And so he would go, and they met in Copenhagen, and they would devise experiments together. He would go back to Berlin, he would perform the experiments, and then he would send her the results by courier on postcards. And he sent her an experiment, and I love this because it's so cinematic, it's right out of the movie. And she got this postcard and she just could not understand the results. And she was puzzling and puzzling as to what had happened. And she was skiing, she was like cross-country skiing with her nephew. And all of a sudden she stopped and she started writing equations in the snow with her ski pole. And she said, "I know what happened. The only way to have gotten these results is if we split the atom." And that was the discovery. That was nuclear fission. But Otto Hahn had not put her name on the papers because she was Jewish. And if her name had been on the papers in Germany, they would have been discredited as Jewish science. And when it came time to award the Nobel Prize, he had kind of convinced himself that he did the whole thing on his own. And so she was sitting in the audience, because you have to remember she was in Scandinavia. Yes. And she wrote in her diaries, "I was so disappointed that he didn't even mention my name."
He didn't even mention her name. Oh my gosh.
And that moment, as a woman in Hollywood who certainly understood discrimination and had seen, I think every woman has seen, that moment you have a wonderful idea and you're in a meeting and and then a man repeats the same idea 10 minutes later, and all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, great, wonderful, go Mike," and
This idea, yeah.
And then, but you're like, it was my idea, So this story moved me so profoundly that I said, this is the novel that I am going to write. And I fictionalized her character, but not. I used many of the things that happened to her in Germany formed the basis of a big part of the novel. But at that point, I had gotten very interested in Los Alamos and in the whole process of building the bomb, and this race between the Germans and the Allies, and the morality of what the scientists were experiencing as they were getting closer and closer. And so that became the setting for an espionage thriller with this extraordinary woman at the center of it. And it is called Hannah's War. And I was very, very lucky because I wrote it on spec. I didn't expect it to be sold. And it was sold in a bidding war, and Little Brown ended up publishing the book. So there you go. That's a little bit of my background.
Exciting. I can imagine what that was like for you as you were researching her and seeing what her, accomplishment and, what her work did in that. She created the atomic bomb.
I mean, as I say in my book somewhere, just because you can split the atom does not mean that you can build a nuclear bomb. Splitting the atom was the concept that allowed
and then it grew from there.
Built. But, there were also many, many good things that came out of that, like nuclear energy, which we now, we mistrust, but it certainly at that time was clean energy, no more coal miners dying in horrible coal accidents. Nuclear energy is clean energy. And I think that, what ended up happening really was that her work was taken away from her. It was taken away from her twice in a way, because it was taken away in Germany. It was literally, published without her name, and then her collaborator got the Nobel Prize without her when they had, I would even argue she had more to do with understanding what had happened. He didn't really quite realize what had happened in this experiment. He needed her to do the physics behind it. But then in Los Alamos, the scientists there were all mostly Jewish and from Eastern Europe. And their motivation for doing this, for creating the bomb, was their terrible fear that Hitler would get it first. Because the Germans, of course, that's where the discovery had happened, was in Germany. And many of the scientists had fled, but there were great scientists who remained in Germany. So they were working around the clock because they had family in Germany. They had family in the camps. They had, the people that they were trying to save. And their terrible fear was Hitler getting a hold of this thing. And so that was the fuel. But the military was also in the camp, in Los Alamos. And they had their own ideas about what the bomb would be used for. And as they got closer and closer, again, in this very tense, conflict-filled time, the scientists were realizing exactly what they had or were on the verge of creating. And they started lobbying for a demonstration. They said, this cannot be used against innocent people. We don't even know the devastation this weapon is capable of.
Yes.
And the military and Truman, who, took over after FDR died, which was very close. I believe it was 100 days between FDR's death and the test of the bomb. And FDR, the scientists had much more faith in him as a humanist who would weigh the incredible destructive power of this thing. And Truman was, Truman really had an election to win. He had a lot of other agendas. And so the scientists themselves were trying to lobby to control how the bomb would be used, and it was taken away from them by the military and the politicians. So I felt that was very much a part of her story of having experienced that literally when the Nazis literally marched in and took over her lab.
So
And then when that happened in a more subtle way in those elements.
this is so important to share. It really is. I mean, it's our history. And I have to point out, there was a quote in your book that I absolutely loved, Dan, and it is, "Try not to become a man of success, but rather try to become a man of value." That is a beautiful quote. So what's behind you putting that in the book, Jan?
Well, actually, that is a quote from the great Albert Einstein. And of course, any scientist, it all goes back to Einstein. Really, for me, it was about how the passion of the pursuit, whether it's science or art or money or a new technology, the passion of pursuit can take you in many, many directions. Every discovery, has the potential for good. And certainly in science, every discovery also has the potential for evil. And that is very clear in the race to discover the atomic bomb. And so the scientist has to be a man or woman of value to see where and to try to guide and to understand how that discovery is going to be used. And Lisa Meitner herself, and I find this fascinating, on her tombstone, it says, "Here lies Lisa Meitner, a physicist and a humanist." And humanist is just as important.
Yes.
And what I saw in my readings about Los Alamos, and I've certainly seen it in our politics, is that people can become so consumed with the goal and with the acquisition of power or even scientific knowledge, which in and of itself is not a good or a bad thing, or money, or whatever it is. People become so possessed by the pursuit that they forget the values that they have to bring to the work. And it is ultimately the values that really determine how you live in the world and how your work helps or does not help others. Yeah. So I see now, for example, you're in Washington State, right?
Yes.
I mean, Bill Gates, obviously extraordinarily rich. He's really devoted the second half of his life to healing the world.
Oh, he does so much.
Extraordinary amount of money. I think he doesn't get enough credit because we're always talking about Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, and his wife. Talk about somebody who's all about helping women and helping.
I know someone that works at the foundation. I've been there, and they do so much that people don't even know about. They're not even aware. Yeah.
I know. And so there, to me, is a man of value.
Yeah.
And, all of the accolades and all of the money and the beautiful house, which we know he has, the value is really what he's leaving us with is equally important as the discovery.
Yes.
And so that's a good example of somebody who is not just a man of importance, but a man.
So is. Thank you, Jan. And we are down to a few minutes left in the show.
So much fun.
That was so powerful. What last words do you want to leave with us today?
Well, okay, I have to say, please buy Hannah's War. It is, in addition to all these wonderful ideas that we've discussed, it's an espionage thriller. It's a page turner. I mean, people who read it basically stay up all night, and I think those are the best books, when you can't put it down and you don't go to sleep. And you can get it at any bookstore. You can order it from Amazon, or better still, bookshop.com, which is the profits of which go to independent bookstores and independent booksellers. You can go to my website, janeliasberg.com. That's Jan, Jan, Eliasberg, ELIASBERG.com. I have all the information about Lisa Meitner, about all the research that I did, about book clubs, and Oppenheimer and Los Alamos. I mean, there is not, you can find anything you want on that website. You can also order a copy of the book there too. So, and I will say, just to end, one of my favorite quotes, which begins the book, is from Meitner herself. She says, "A scientist has the ability to dedicate work to both good and evil. Therefore, it is essential that the scientist," let me just quickly, I don't want to misquote her, it's right here. Okay, great. "Science can be used for good or evil, so it's incumbent upon scientists to ensure that their work makes the world a better place."
Oh. Yes.
Let's make the world a better place.
Let's make the world a better place. Here's to that.
Here's
And
that.
isn't it true, Jan? We all, in our own little way, can make the world a better place.
All our choices, absolutely. Yes. Every little choice has something to do with, it can, with making the world a better place.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you for all this information and this beautiful wisdom. And, you make me feel good, Jan. You inspire me.
Well, read the book. You'll feel good.
Oh, I love it.
Thank you so much, Paula. It was really wonderful to talk to you.
Oh, wonderful to talk to you. Such an honor. I'm so happy to share you with everyone.
Thank you.
Love, hugs, and blessings to you,
Thank
Jan.
Thank you very much.
And to everyone out there, love, hugs, and blessings. Thank you for joining us. Oh, here's to that better world. I love it.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.